Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are right now. Welcome to today's webinar about autonomous testing. And this should be a discussion about autonomous testing, where we are right now, what's coming in the future, about automating testing, what is autonomous testing changing in automation. And I'm not alone on this one. The star guest here on this webinar is Bas Dijkstra. He is an independent test automation consultant with more than 17 years of experience and the developer of restassured.net. But let's introduce him by himself. This is Bas Live.
Thank you so much, Tobias, and thank you for having me. I think you pretty much covered the most important thing about me already. As I said, I've been working in automation for some 17 years now as a consultant, as a trainer, as public speaker sometimes. I write here and there. They're doing lots of different stuff, really, but all through a love of all things automation and testing.
That's lovely. But that is, Bas, that is, first of all, thanks for being on the webinar. And that is something that we could actually read on your webpage. But what is it really about you? So you're saying you're doing that since 17 years.
Yes.
So what did you bring to testing, test automation and stuff like that? What was the trigger actually that was built?
I don't okay, and this is going to be the first big disappointment of this webinar. I cannot guarantee that it'll be the only one. If you were going to expect some kind of super motivational, like so many people in testing, I sort of kind of accidentally fell into it. But I love contributing to teams and contributing to developing high quality, interesting software products. So I sort of kind of fell into it. So I studied computer science in university. We didn't really talk about testing back then, and unfortunately, from what I've heard, the situation hasn't improved all that much. A little bit, but not all that much, unfortunately. But so I sort of kind of fell into testing. But what I love about it is that it's so versatile. It's so broad. And there's so many things. Everything is about quality, and you get to work with developers. You get to work with end users. You get to work with everything and everybody in between. So it's I sort of kind of fell into it, fell in love with it, and haven't really looked back since.
Okay, but as you said, you fell into it, and there are so many different, like, let's call it stakeholders, developers, testers, management, stuff like that. And it's so versatile, as you mentioned. It's like, and yeah, you're doing consulting. It's like, and that is one of the typical questions that I want to ask in the beginning before we really start with the discussion. Is like, can you give us like what was your most bizarre experience in the last 17 years in those consulting projects? It's like, and bizarre meaning like that was the worst quality you have ever seen when you came to the project, or they were the most resistant against learning on how they could improve the project, stuff like that. Something that you will never forget in the next 17 years.
So I'd probably have to look back at one of the first projects that I did. So keep in mind that we're talking 2007, something like that. And this is a story I still use to this day in talks and in workshops and training courses as an example of how not to approach an automation project. First of all, don't see automation as a project, because it's not. It's just part of your overall software development activities. It's not a separate project. But way back that project, that client that I'm referring to definitely saw that as a project. So they had this workload of, I think it was around 150 regression test scripts, and they just wanted those automated. They flew us in. They said, well, you're going to automate this, and then you're going to leave again. And it everything in hindsight, everything about, so we did the best we could. and we did the best we could with the knowledge we had then, with the experience we had then. But looking back on that, there are so many things that are like textbook examples of how not to do things. So having these humongously long regression test scripts and trying to translate them one-on-one into automation. Measuring the progress of the automation project by the number of scripts that were translated from manual to automation.
So the typical problems, more or less, isn't it?
Having a separate automation team that didn't really talk to the other testers and never even saw a developer. Well, I could go on for a while, but yeah, that was at that moment it wasn't that bizarre, but in hindsight, and that's why I'm still using that project as an example of how not to do things. In hindsight, it had all the things that we learn how not to do things these days.
That's actually brilliant. Hey, and that being said, actually, I guess everybody on the stream knows you. I guess you are far more known than I am. Perhaps a little introduction myself. That is a bit strange. That feels bizarre that I introduce myself, but nevertheless, I'm Tobias. I'm the founder of Test Results AO, and Test Results AO is a platform that you can use for test automation today that fills the gaps actually that are in today's solutions, so that you can actually make sure that your software works with the support of test automation. And that's enough of advertisement. Perhaps let's get into the topic of automated testing. And before we define or before we discuss like what is automated testing for each of us, because I guess everybody has a different meaning of what autonomous testing is. I found something interesting by going back into your blog postings, which is quite interesting. And I usually do that I go to the first blog post or the first post that somebody ever did that is still publicly available. And by that, I found out that in your earlier blog posts, the images are missing. So they are all broken in the 2013, 2014 range.
Oh yeah, I can explain. I'm not going to, but I can explain. That's quite easy. That's leftovers from a migration from WordPress to Jekyll.
Yeah.
And general laziness.
Yeah, again, like every developer, I can explain that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and what I saw there is actually your first blog post was in November 2013 about Selenium WebDriver and using Excel and stuff like that, which I get back at the end of the webinar because I saw a LinkedIn post from you like a week ago, what not to do, and it perfectly links to that first blog post in 2013.
I knew you were going to refer to this.
But the most interesting blog post back then that I found is actually that you had a blog post titled, and I wrote it down, it's Generating Automated Tests from Specification. So it's already about test automation, but it's not about what everybody's thinking about test automation is like having an automated execution, but having like the tests automatically generated.
Yes.
Which is still something that I see today in 2023 as what people teach as like that is autonomous testing. Give me something and I generate test cases out for you. That is already autonomous testing. Again, we start with the discussion in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. But what you wrote there is, and I need to write it down to actually not get it wrong, is like you said, in most cases, the implementation of automated testing focuses on the automated execution of previously defined test cases. These test cases come in the form of test scripts or use cases that are prepared by test analysts or test engineers. Often, before the introduction of automated testing in a project and/or team, these test cases were executed by hand in the past. So far, so good. And then, however, what if we could also automate the creation of test cases? When applied correctly, this would yield an even more efficient testing process. So what do you think about that these days?
Wow. First of all, my compliments for the digging. I know the blog post you're referring to, and I know the efforts and the project that triggered me writing that. Mm-hmm. And it's been a while since I've been thinking of that. So thank you for the flashback. I think so back then, I think it's a post from like 2014, 2015, something like that, maybe. I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I think it's somewhere around that. And back then and still now, I think a lot of it is actually. I was prepared to be embarrassed by what I wrote in the past, but by being confronted by what I wrote in the past. But it's not that no, it's not that bad actually. So I still stand by, and we still see that a lot. So a lot of the focus in automation is about automating test execution.
Yeah, if you think about that, it didn't change much. The post
No,
was
that
actually
hasn't. That no, exactly. That hasn't changed a lot. And so way later, I don't think I wrote it as on a blog post, but rather as something like a LinkedIn post or an article, something somewhere about my definition of test automation, which is actually much broader than the automation of test execution. It's just using tools to perform specific testing activities more efficiently. So and testing activities that can be execution of predefined test cases. So performing some kind of action, triggering some kind of process in your system under test, and inspecting the result and comparing that with some predefined codified outcome. But there's actually lots more than that you can do with tools that can help you do testing more efficiently, which is unsurprisingly what we're going to talk about today. Because autonomous testing is like I've seen people talk about and write about autonomous testing as like a next step or the next wave in automations that will finally start looking beyond just automated test execution, but also see what if we applied tools to the steps that we do before we start executing that, to start using tools to help us do coming up or creating, well, test cases, test scripts, whatever you want to call them, in a more efficient manner.
So is that what you would understand as autonomous testing?
That's a very good question. I don't think I've got a snappy definition for autonomous testing yet. But if I hear people talk about autonomous testing, it's something that you see more. It's starting to, that term is starting to come up more and more often. I'm still working on processing that, and I'm still shaping my story around and how I think about autonomous testing. You know that's not a surprise to you. But it definitely so it's not like some evolution of a new ways of automating the execution of test cases. It's definitely broadening the scopes of what we can do with tools. Of course, you need a snappy name to do that, and somehow the term autonomous testing came up. I still struggle with the term autonomous in all, because and we're probably going to dive a little bit deeper into that in a moment, and how autonomous is autonomous testing really, and probably even more importantly, can we make it truly autonomous? And I think even more importantly, should we want testing to be truly autonomous without any kind of human intervention at all?
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? The topic is more like, so broadening it up, getting automation in a broader sense from getting rid of only the execution part, but also like test case generation, test script generation, automatic healing, stuff like that, and also test data generation. That is one thing, but the autonomous testing is exactly what I'm also like challenging all the time. And it's like, hey, okay, so do we have autonomous driving? Like these full self-driving capabilities that Elon Musk is promoting since like a century. Meanwhile, it's like, okay, that is autonomous driving, and do we really want to go the same road with autonomous testing? It's like we promise the word autonomous is actually defined. So we promise something is autonomous testing, which means more or less like I press a button and the software can test the other software and gives me the results. But the thing is, what I don't understand, and perhaps I know I'm interested in your opinion on that one. Is like, how would autonomous testing ever work? Is it like, what does testing mean then if a PC or if a piece of software actually does autonomously test something else? Is it like testing for success, or can it also test for failure? Because I saw you talk about mutation testing. It's like where you induce failure in your tests to ensure that your tests are a better quality. And the question on autonomous testing is like, so what is the goal of autonomous testing at all? So generating test cases is fine, but is it generating positive test cases, so stuff that should pass? Is it generating test cases that are meant to be failed by something? And how would it actually decide on what is what?
That is a very good question that I don't hear or see a lot of people talking about still yet. So I'm very, very happy that you brought that up, because that's to me that's exactly what I still struggle with that. So I've been in automation for 70 years. So 17, by the way, 17, not 70. I'm old, not that old yet. So it should come as no surprise that I'm a big proponent of using tools to do your testing more efficiently. I am a big proponent of using tools to I think we definitely should start looking at how can tools help us in other parts of the testing process other than just the execution. That's what I'm absolutely forward to. And I'm absolutely in favor of doing that. But should we leave everything to a tool? I don't think so. So and that's so that's and I don't want to go off on a rant against the term autonomous testing, because I'm going to draw a parallel with and please interrupt me if I'm going off on a tangent. I don't struggle with the concept. If I struggle with the way people sometimes market, or I'm afraid that people are going to start marketing it as a solution to, well, now you don't need human beings anymore. In much the same way as I've struggled a lot with the term codeless.
Yeah.
Because and I struggle with the term autonomous in a similar way, because it promises, it gives off the air, it gives off the vibe of something that it just cannot live up to.
Yeah, but that's typically marketing, isn't it?
It
In all
is,
areas of life.
yes. But the problem is the marketing is doing people in marketing, they're doing that for a reason, but because they know people are interested, it triggers people, and ultimately it makes people spend money on tools that may promise them things that it cannot live up to.
You mean what automated testing does, more or less, since 20
Oh,
years?
yes, the test automation in general. So, and this is also what. So I don't do that too much myself, and you can even tell that from the name of my company. It still has the term test automation in it. That's why people start talking about automation and testing instead of test automation, because that too, that's to them, and I agree with them. Although I'm still using the term test automation just because for reasons. Just that test automation, it promises the automation of testing, which when in fact it is I think much closer to the definition that I gave just earlier, using tools to perform specific testing activities more efficiently. And the same is true for what we now refer to as autonomous testing. what we're talking about when we talk about autonomous testing. I would love to see people use tools more efficiently to help them speed up the process of coming up with test specifications or test cases.
So that I think that's the keyword, isn't it? Like if I open LinkedIn these days, and that started 1 or 2 months ago, what I see is like, hey, I put this in the prompt in ChatGPT and I got the following answer, and I tricked ChatGPT into a wrong answer, and look at that. I put in like how to test a word processor, and I got all of the test cases that I never thought of. So is ChatGPT a tool that you think like will make us more efficient? And not ChatGPT as a tool itself, but as a class of tools like those large language models in the background, and having a prompt that you can ask to, that you can use to query those LLMs?
Yes.
Okay, that's a short answer.
Yes, no, but when used in the right way and with a healthy amount of caution, I think. Because
caution because of,
as you said, they're large learning models, which means they don't make decisions by themselves. They are not sentient things. They are all of these, and that's true for everything that's AI driven. It's that these are only as good as the data that's used to train them.
Hey, that was exactly my argument, and for all the viewers, actually, I put this on the stream here. It's like you can watch that. That is actually a Microsoft research guy who has a 60 minutes video on GPT-4. So on the not released version of GPT-4 before it was sanitized to be more secure, so that it doesn't give you any answers that you cannot live with, like for political correctness and stuff like that. So what you need to understand is those LLMs are always trained and afterwards sanitized to be more secure. And this guy did some tests on GPT-4 before the sanitization took place. And the interesting thing is what he did, because I always said like, hey, it's all statistics, and it's all big data in the end. So what is different this time in AI than like in the 80s is we have more storage and we have more compute power, and both of them actually gives us what we see right now. It looks marvelous right now, but there will also be an end at some point in time where we are stuck again, like we've been for the last 3 times when AI was a hype.
Yeah.
But that guy actually has some insights on GPT-4, and that was interesting. He asked the system for unicorn in TIC-Z code, so to use it in LaTeX. And GPT-4 generated that code and actually created a unicorn. And that's not so special. You can say like, yeah, it found an image of a unicorn somewhere and could recreate that code because it had shapes. But what he did afterwards is like he modified the code and removed the horn. So now he had a horse, more or less. And then he gave the system the horse again after a restart, so it doesn't have any memory, after a restart, and asked, what is missing here to make this a unicorn? So somehow the system actually identified the image as a horse in this case, and added the horn in at the head, actually in the right position, right direction. Everything was perfect afterwards. And that is actually that his claim was more or less like, if you see that, what kind of intelligence is that? And there is apparently an essay from 1995 that talks about human intelligence. It's like, what is human intelligence? Back then there was a discussion on IQ tests. So how high is your IQ? You could test that, and you can still test it. And there are still discussions around that. And he said, like, based on that, there's a common agreement worldwide on by all the scientists that there are like 7 criteria that identifies human intelligence. And he comes up with a conclusion and say like, yeah, according to those criteria, artificial intelligence is not intelligent because it cannot plan ahead. That is one of the reasons. So it's all in detail in that YouTube video that I linked. But he said like, perhaps all of the idea of how intelligence is actually working, how it is built, could be challenged by those LLMs, and say like, perhaps that is the right approach to define intelligence, isn't it? and that would bring us a step further. And then it would be an efficient tool that you still need to treat with cautiousness. Is it like
yeah.
Because I usually, if people ask me like, what do you think of ChatGPT? I say it's bullshit because it's based on GPT 3.5 and the answers are shitty most of the time if you look at them in more detail, if you need something specific. But if you treat it as another colleague, like as a junior developer on the side or a junior tester on the side that can actually challenge some of your thoughts and give you new insights, that is actually something that is working today already, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So and again, but it's I think we're having the same fun. So you know how all these things are marketed as game changer, and this will fundamentally change the course of the universe. And I don't really believe in that. It's just the next step. I like evolution instead of revolution, and it may look like a revolution because, of course, the steps that we're taking are huge, and the developments are going really fast. So it'll probably take us a while, and us just as maybe as humankind in general, getting a little bit philosophical here, maybe, but that's fine. It'll take us a while to look back and see, well, it was just, it may have been a bigger step, but it was still an evolutionary step, another revolution, and it wasn't as fundamentally different as but we need experience and we need to be able to look back on that. Also, something that AI cannot really do, by the way, or not yet. So, and I think at some point we will realize again that, and I love the example that you just gave, that it's a fantastic tool that can help us, that supports us, and that is not, and that's going to replace some of the things that we do, but it's not going to replace us full stop.
Okay, so your definition of autonomous testing would then be broadening up the scope of test automation. It's a good marketing term, but the context is more or less that.
Yes, right now, yes. Okay. And again, my views might change as well in the future. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? But yes, right now, and that's why I struggle with the term autonomous, because again, but I love the concept behind the marketing term, that we can use big data and learning models and just plain old, big pools of data and lots of computing power to help us do specific things more efficiently. But I don't think it's a good idea to just fully trust that and say, we are going to leave it all to a tool or make it right now, which to me is what I think about when I talk about autonomous. It's, we don't need to touch that anymore. We don't need to look at that anymore. I don't think that that's a good idea right now. Not yet, and maybe not ever. Well, not ever, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Actually, I would say like we will never see autonomous testing. You know why?
Tell me.
If you would have autonomous testing, so let's assume you have a piece of software that can test another piece of software out autonomously. Like you press a button and it can test the piece of software and gives you the result like, okay, it works as expected or it doesn't work as expected. Because that is more or less what the term suggests, right? If you do have that piece of software, it can actually understand the intent of use of the other piece of software. And if I do have a piece of software that can understand the intent of use, why should I not tell that piece of software, hey, behave like this? And then I don't need testing at all. I mean, if I do have a piece of software that can autonomously test and identify how it should test another piece of software, it can also act like that piece of software. And if that's the case, and we trust the system, then we don't need any testing at all. So as soon as we do have autonomous testing, my stance is we don't need testing at all.
And also, in the same line of thought, do we then still need developers?
Exactly, exactly. At one point in time, we have the general system that can solve all of the problems autonomously. That is the point of autonomous testing, isn't it? That is more or
Yeah.
less the claim that's inside.
Yes. Yes. So I think, and that's where I think we should still be very cautious with what's promised versus what's realistic and what's um, acceptable socially, ethically, and
Yeah.
just in just in terms of common sense, really. As those, so I wrote some of the questions that I think would might, if they didn't come up, I want them to. I want to bring them up.
Sure.
Is first of all, is how autonomous is autonomous testing? Really? Well, that's what we were talking about. And are we really a follow up question from me to you? And we're just going to flip this around. Um, are what do you think? Are we, when we say autonomous, are we really testing?
I guess it depends a bit. There,
You're an excellent consultant.
The answer.
It
The
depends.
answer is a bit difficult. If I would target the audience of Michael Bolton, for example, I would say it can never be testing. Never ever. Testing is always a human exercise. But then I read this. An essay from Jason Arbon, actually from former Test AI, who said like, "Hey guys, did you look those terms testing, checking, inspecting? Did you look them up in the dictionary? More or less like testing is the art of executing a check. So you're discussing about something that is not worth discussing. That is, and that is my stance on that as well. It's like, is there? I mean, I see where those different group of people come from, and I also understand why you speak about test automation. I do exactly the same. Even I like the term automation in testing much more, but people are using Google to find test automation solutions. They are not looking for I'm looking for automation in testing solution. So just from a SEO point of view, you need to do test automation, otherwise you're not found at all. And I see what they want to do is actually like it always needs us as human consultants to actually do testing. And everything else that is automated is checking, and that is a different level. You cannot check what you can test, more or less like that. You can checks are always repetitive, they are defined, they can also only be done against something, so you need some kind of requirement that you check against. And testing is always exploring the application, like using it and taking notes and exercising actually the subject under test. And that is, in my experience, to be honest, I mean, we found a lot we did consulting previously, and we found a lot of problems that were not found during formal testing in exploratory testing. So many problems, actually, that the customer told us, like, no. So we do first exploratory testing, and if you guys say it works rather stable now, then we start with the formal process.
I love that. So often you see it the other way around, but I think that's a great way of, so let the humans decide first and have a go at it, see if they can find some obvious, but maybe some not so obvious problems, and only then start the formal verification.
That's true. With one single exception, is like I would always have some kind of smoke test in the evening before I take the new version, because if it doesn't even start, I don't need to take the hassle.
And that again is very much in line with how a lot of people, even the names that you refer to just now, are seeing the value in automation. And it's not of test automation in general. It's not replacing testing, and the fact that and I think I saw to name just one, Michael Bolton just write about that last week. So the fact that an automated tester, well, he named it differently, but well, I don't care too much about the terminology, at least not right now. The fact that your test run, your collection of checks or whatever passes, is a good indication that that you're ready to start testing, and not that you're done testing. I like that.
Yeah, but if you think about it, that brings us back to do the checks first. So let the automation run, and afterwards do the exploration. And I don't know.
It depends on the depth and on the extent of your checks. I'm all for doing some smoke checks before you even start looking at, because if some really obvious things are, it's not even worth spending time and effort on.
Yeah,
So no, absolutely true.
I guess all of us learned that doing consulting in
Yeah.
different projects. I guess everyone learned that and said like, okay, I will have smoke tests. I'll never do that again.
No, absolutely.
Hey, but again, this autonomous testing thing is like it's interesting because if I see those posts, it's most like autonomous testing in end-to-end tests. And in preparation of that webinar, we also discussed it already. It's like contract testing and stuff like that, and that always reminds me of unit testing. And I also saw that in your mutation testing, which is more or less like targeted for unit tests. And then I am a bit old. I confess that. I somehow remember the good old times. So around 2008, I was writing unit tests as well for a company. And back then we used Microsoft PACS, which in a sense is more or less like what people claim is brand new now for end-to-end testing. It is generating tests, right? Do you know Microsoft PACS?
No.
Okay, what it does is more or less like it has access to its white box testing. It has access to your code and does some fuzzy search through your code to identify edge cases and input values that could trigger random codes somewhere. So it goes through all the code, does some static analysis and also dynamic analysis actually by executing the code, and identifies all of the different cases that are required to execute the whole flow, the whole control flow, that you really do have a coverage of 100% afterwards. If the input is correct to reach the coverage, it's a different topic.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it did exactly that, isn't it? It looked at the best specification it can have, the code, because that is what is actually executed, and generated out all of the test case. And that is what people somehow call autonomous testing, partially.
Isn't that more like how we look at model-based testing?
Mm-hmm. That's my point. Is actually it feels all the same. It's different words, but there is no real progress. If you think about 2008, I mean,
that's why I highly suspect that if we've had some time to think about this, to organize our thoughts around this, as the software testing and software development community, we're going to see this as a next step in an evolution rather than a revolution. Like you, I've got the blessings of a couple of years of experience. It's also something I wrote about quite recently and not running after the latest trends and the tools and everything, because a lot of this is just the next step in the evolution. It's a big step. I admit that, and it's because we're talking about what people call AI and super large data sets and tools that can help us do things so incredibly fast. It's becoming harder and harder for us to understand what is this thing really doing.
It's actually impossible,
which makes it look it reminds me a bit of, you only have to be about 10% smarter than the average person to be seen as an expert, and people can't discern anymore if people are incapable of determining whether you're 10% more intelligent than them or like 200%. I sort of kind of get the feeling that we're in a similar, dealing with a similar thing right here, because it is complex. It is huge. It is pretty different from what we've been doing like that. But does that make it a revolution?
So is it too complex for us? If it's just 10% smarter than we are, is it then?
That's a very good question. And that brings me back to I don't think I can give a proper answer, a direct answer to that right now. But following up to that question is, if we don't really understand it, don't truly understand it yet. Um, should we use it, and to what extent? And should we rely on it, and to what extent? I don't know.
And that's my point, and I want to show the URL again. Look at that video actually, because that guy also says like we are in trillion dimensional space, and we just don't understand what's going on. We see the input, we see the results,
Yes.
but nobody on this planet understands what is going on, and we cannot mathematically prove the result. We don't know why the system behaves like it behaves, and he even has some nice plots of higher dimensions where you actually see unexpected behaviors, but in the result it works actually out, and that is I guess what you just mentioned, isn't it?
There's a reason why so many people are advocating for, like, I don't know if it's been on the news over here. I don't know if it's been on the news in Switzerland as well. People are advocating for, like, let's pause all the developments in this area for like 6 months to be able to properly process what the bleep is going on here right now, to get some breathing space, and see, well, what's going to be the impact of this.
Mhm.
How and I think that's a very good. It's one of the first truly sensible ideas that I've seen in coming up in politics over here for a long time. But I think that's a really good idea, because these are huge steps, and I'm afraid is probably not the right word, but I think we might want to be a little bit more cautious here at some points with. Maybe that makes me look like, well, an ancient person who says, well,
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I would say
it is, and we cannot oversee the impact yet. So, I'm a big fan of new technology and all that stuff. You wouldn't tell it by how my wife looks at me and talks about me sometimes. You're like, oh, that old person. This is I'm quite old fashioned sometimes in my thinking. I know that, but in this, I'm truly of the opinion, and it's probably a good idea to take some time to say, well, what is it really that we're building here? What is it that we are starting to rely on? What is it that we're starting to use? Do we understand it? And if we don't truly understand, maybe we don't need to understand it, but at least we need to understand what the implications are of us not understanding it.
Yeah, that's the point. Perhaps we don't need to understand it, but it makes us better, something like that. It helps us a lot. It's smarter than but we cannot understand it, and we don't need to understand it.
Maybe not, but
like autonomous
at least
testing.
I think that something that we should understand is the implications of us not understanding it.
Yeah, I guess you need to define of what do you expect more or less from what can happen. But in the end, will you ever be able to say like, hey, those are the implications because we don't understand it, because we don't understand it. So it's rather, but
that too is a very good question. It's almost a little bit like a chicken or an egg problem.
Is it? It's
is,
also like
yeah.
the Big Bang. What has been before.
And that's what I think makes this so difficult.
Yeah, that's true. But getting back in to AI in testing, test automation is like I got a rather interesting question actually on one of my last seminars, which was like about AI and in which areas AI might already support us today. But the thing I want to ask you is like, do you currently see any benefits of AI in testing? So based on the tools you know, based on the stuff you heard, do you see any benefits where you would say like, yeah, that there is actually an efficiency gain because of X, Y, Z, or there is we do have better test cases because of X, Y, Z, we have better coverage, stuff like that. And it's okay to say no, to be honest.
There might be, but again, there's a big gap between promises in marketing
Mhm.
and what we're actually seeing. Not as much. Let my answer be not as much as the people who are marketing these tools are claiming that they are delivering.
Okay, I take that
I
as.
see. I can see some in helping letting AI or rather instead of AI, let's talk about large sets of data
Mhm.
help us to maybe come up with interesting things. So one of the things that I read while I was reading up on autonomous testing is let me see if I can very quickly find what they were referring to. So there are a couple of different so learning from so I'm going to let's see if I can paste the link in the chat because I think it was a very interesting sending message only supported for hosts or whatever. So I can't. But that's okay. It's a blog written by Andrew Knight on the AppTools blog, so you'll probably be able to find it if you Google for it. About learning from observability data.
Mhm.
I love it. So using, I don't know if we should call that AI, but observing how end users actually use your system,
Mhm.
gathering that data, gathering lots of data around how they, and using that as input to test new release. I love that idea.
Mhm.
Why? Because um, we can predict or try to predict um, until we're blue in the face about how our customers are going to actually use our system, but we don't know until our users are actually going to use the systems.
Mhm.
You've seen these memes with, oh, but our customers, our users are never going to do that. And then they do exactly that thing. And we can learn from that. Is that still AI? Is that still autonomous? I don't know. But using that, all of that data to help us come up with more interesting and richer testing for future release, I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I saw something like that already out there, like where you get the log files and you can analyze the log files and automate based on that.
No, that's just one of the
Yeah, it's just.
one way of gathering that data observability. You can gather the data in lots of different ways, and
Yeah.
log files are actually well, a very good way to do that.
Yeah, actually, perhaps we should term the next term already. If autonomous testing doesn't work out, you heard it here first. User-driven testing. That's
Yep.
that's the next big hype.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, so let me get back to one of the first blog posts that I've seen. Is like, because that is also one of the learnings, isn't it? You've written about data-driven testing in Selenium WebDriver using Excel. That is the really very first blog post in November 2013. And
Yes.
like a week
Yes.
ago, I saw this LinkedIn post from you that said like, do you really need to pull your test data from a complex source like Excel? So what is the answer? Do you?
Um, this was more like a not a rant, but I still see a lot of people trying to do that, and maybe it has gotten easier, but it's Excel is so it's very similar to UI automation. So the way Excel is built and the way graphical user interfaces are built are optimized for interaction with you, interacting with human beings, and that's something different than interacting. Things like CSV files or JSON files or XML files, they are typically written to be consumed by human beings anyway. They are optimized for consumption, interaction, processing by computer. Excel isn't. That's written for human beings, and you can tell, um, which makes it so. And sure, it can, and I see people do that with the idea of then, well, oh, person A who doesn't really know how to code, who doesn't want to code, can specify the test data or maybe even the test steps if you have in some kind of keyword-driven testing framework, and then user B writes the code to pull in that data from Excel. I think that's horribly complex and very error prone. So, and it's also separate. Also, have you ever tried to put an Excel file on the version control?
No, actually not, because it's a binary format, isn't it? It's pretty difficult.
It is.
Impossible.
Yes, it is pretty difficult. So that's yet another thing why I don't think it's a very good idea to do that. So I've not been. So again, I used to have a WordPress site where it's very easy to get statistics about individual pages. I still got those, but now it's Google Analytics, and in all honesty, I don't look at it that often anymore. But it's one of the very first blog posts I wrote, and it's still something. And I referred to that in a talk I did a couple of years ago. I got some statistics about this is all the stupid stuff I wrote about in the past, and it's getting this amount of hits every month. And this is the thing I think is much more important, and it's like getting 10% of the hits, of the views.
Yeah.
And that's something that sort of kind of annoys me. And the post that you picked out is a great example of that. Something that I used to do, and I saw a lot of people doing that like 10 years ago, and which I now said, well, it works, and if you can get it to work, fine, but there are more straightforward ways of doing that.
And that's exactly my point. And that is why I was so happy when I found those blog posts, actually, because that brings me to my next question on autonomous testing. To keep on the topic, is like, isn't that something that could actually be supported by machine learning? That you say, like, we don't need to have data, we don't need to have data-driven tests anymore that get their data from somewhere, but we could actually generate a machine learning model based on productive data, because that is the data we have. That is a lot of data, and the machine learning algorithms could actually understand the patterns in that data and could generate synthesized data just on demand. So you wouldn't need to have any of those. You could actually ask the system, give me 10 records.
I think that's exactly what we were just talking about using data from production and how users are actually bad, and base the data that you're going to add, your synthetic data that you're going to use to feed into your systems during testing, base that on what you actually observe in production. I think that's a brilliant idea, because it makes for a much richer and much more lifelike testing and automation efforts, rather than, well, see what examples we can come up with, either as an individual test automation engineer or maybe as a development team. If we're doing something like BDD, and you come up with examples.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I love BDD, and I love the way it facilitates the communication, but it's still very much limited to what a relatively small group of people can come up with in terms of examples and in terms of data. Why not use what you've got in production, and all the instead of using the data that 3 people can come up with, which is still hypothetical data, use the data that maybe tens of thousands of people come up with who are actually using your system.
Yeah, I guess the daily answer is trivial, isn't it? You cannot, because it's productive data, and at least I see it with our customers, that they cannot use data from production because there are privacy concerns, there are concerns of traceability of their customers and stuff like that. So they need to come up with fake data, and doing that by hand, if you have a rather complex schema, is not trivial.
No, that's true. But I think that we are smart enough as human beings, as engineers, to come up with a solution to take that production data and use it in a way that's still GDPR compliant and all those kinds of things, all those and follows all the rules and regulations to help us do that. And again, that's another example of using tools to do some of our testing activities in a more efficient way. It will not replace the human factor in testing and in software development in general, but it's a great way to do things do more valuable things in a more efficient way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess we are completely aligned on that. Hey, in the last 5 minutes, Bas, what are your, because I saw your post on the automation trends, and not to follow the automation trends because they are always short-lived and usually nobody can live up to the hype that they claim what is coming in the next few years. Is like, what would you, and I also saw that you promote like learning design patterns and stuff that actually brings you forward. And what would be your recommendations, or what would be your best practices in 2023? If I would need to do 5 things to actually boost my career, what would it be?
5.
3,
So
maybe 3.
Okay, 3. Okay, then still 1. Stop using the term best practices.
Okay.
No, that all joking aside. That's a really hard question to answer. But if I'm going to say only one thing, and that's something that's really hard to do. It took me 17 years to get to and to have that, again, that hindsight, and that the experience and making lots of mistakes to see, and seeing a lot of things come and go, to see, well, and there's a lot of fundamental things that haven't really changed since I started, and probably not since way before I started. That applies in everything in software development and software testing, and it definitely, I think it definitely applies to the topic that we discussed today as well. It's to look beyond just what individual tools or techniques promise, and try and dive a little deeper to see, well, but what is it that's actually going on here? And it's probably something that's been around for, again, evolution, not revolution. But that's hard. So it's maybe not a snappy advice. Well, do this, read this blog post, and you'll be 50% smarter, and you'll lose 20 pounds in the process. But the bit that I give to everybody is try and see the fundamental patterns and principles behind everything that you do and that you use and that you see, because that's what's going to make you, and knowledge about that and experience with those is what's going to make you more versatile, maybe a little bit more maybe a little bit more grumpy. It sounded a little bit more grumpy. This is just same stuff. But it's going to make you, I think, a more versatile and something more cautious, and a more ultimately, I think, a more valuable engineer, whatever kind of individual contributor you are, really.
Hey, those are amazing words at the end. And I guess I use that last slot as an advertisement and say, like, hey, check out Test Results AO, because we did exactly that. So we took the experience of years and called it codified expertise. So we actually said, like, hey, how do you usually solve those problems? And how could we put that into code that it becomes reusable? But nevertheless, having experience, I guess, is exactly what brings everyone further, and it just takes some time to build that up. So there's not this one shot where you say, like, "Hey, do this," and
I think that as follow-up advice is try new stuff out. Try these tools out and approach them with a healthy bit of skepticism, which I think is, well, what every tester does. Experiment with those. Don't be afraid of trying out new things. Don't be afraid of because that's the only way to learn. Really.
Yeah, that's actually what on my sweatshirt is like. Fail. You fail a lot of times before you pass.
I definitely did that. Well, you've confronted me with some of those examples from that from my own past. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry for that.
No, but it's absolutely true. I like talking about those things because I think I have learned something from that, and I always hope other people learn from that as well. So at least they won't make the same mistake. They're completely welcome to make new mistakes.
Yeah.
That's fine, but that's how we progress as a community.
Hey, it was a perfect time, perfect discussion. I love the exchange.
Thank you so
and
much.
I guess we are on time, and I need to end the stream just because everybody is only booking for till 6 o'clock. And yeah, again, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me, Tobias. Bye-bye.
Looking forward to talking to you again. Bye.
Cheers.